media's depiction of Santa is wrong. Written by Sapphire Lion 15. Most movies, TV specials, malls, and Christmas cards depict him as this large, grandfatherly, overly cheerful man who employs hundreds of elves to make toys for the good children of the world. Then he delivers them via a flying reindeer-drawn sleigh in exchange for cookies and a glass of milk. That's not right at all. Before you rip me to shreds in the comments for being a Scrooge or a Grinch or whatever you call someone who makes fun of Santa, hear me out. I'm not denying Santa's existence. He is very real. But he doesn't look anything like what you'd imagine. Let me start from the beginning. I loved Christmas growing up. My grandparents owned a dairy farm in northern Wisconsin, and we would always drive up there for a week to celebrate Christmas. Those Christmases are some of my happiest childhood memories. My grandfather would take us, my little sister, cousins, and I, on a sleigh ride around the farm. He would take us sledding down the massive hill near the woods, and then help us to build snowmen. My grandmother would make enough food to feed an army, topped off with her homemade sugar cookies and hot chocolate. But the best part of the trip was the night before Christmas. We kids had a whole bedroom to ourselves, but every year, one of us would be dared by the others to sleep in the living room to try and catch Santa. They always fell asleep though, but none of us were that disappointed. We did, after all, have a pile of toys to comfort us. The Christmas I was 9, however, was the last truly happy Christmas at my grandparents' farm. That year, I had been picked to try and stay up and meet Santa. Despite the failures of the previous years, I had decided that I was going to see him. I don't even remember why I was so determined. It was years ago. But it seemed a good enough reason to 9-year-old me. So, when we were certain that the adults were asleep, I grabbed my blanket and pillow and ran on my toes down the stairs, and I got myself set up on the couch. Santa hadn't come yet. The cookie plate was still full. The tree still had no gifts. I wrapped my blanket around my shoulders, faced the fireplace, and I waited. There was a blizzard that night. It would later be recorded as one of the worst snowstorms in the history of Wisconsin. I remember looking out the window and seeing nothing but white. Maybe the sound of the storm's wind is why no one heard what happened that night. I really don't know. I sat there for at least 4 hours, pinching myself, telling myself stories, doing anything that I could to stay awake. I think that it was midnight. Yeah, it must have been. When I looked out the window, staring at the snow, and I thought I saw a shape cutting through the air. I went to the window, wondering if it had been an owl. Grandpa had always complained about owls harassing Grandma's terrier. And then I heard it. Several sharp thuds on the roof, followed by a long scratching noise, as if something were being dragged across the top of the house. Santa, I thought. Even though I had been expecting it, my heart rate tripled in fear and excitement. I ran back to the couch and I jumped behind it. I could barely keep from squealing. I was going to meet Santa. The Santa. I heard something heavy land in the fireplace. I put my head against the floor and peeked out from under the couch. I saw a pair of sooty black boots walking along the carpet, followed by a bulging sack. I listened to the footprints. I could tell that he was heading for the cookie plate sitting on the dining room table. I got off of the floor and I looked at the table, bracing myself to meet him face to face. I saw him and I screamed. He was wearing a red coat, hat, and boots, but they were practically rags, barely staying on. He wasn't fat at all. He was a skeleton. Literally, there was no skin anywhere. But his eyes looked like they belonged to a living person, wide and full of life. They were out of place on this living corpse. He turned sharply when he heard me scream, as if I had startled him. He saw me, dropped his sack, and ran over and covered my mouth with his thankfully gloved hand. I stopped screaming, though I was still scared. He took his hand away, took my hand, and pulled me to my feet. "Merry Christmas, Jess. Have you been good this year?" The voice was what you would expect from Santa, but it was still so frighteningly out of place, I couldn't speak. I just stared. "Let me see." He reached into his filthy, ripped pocket and pulled out an incredibly thick scroll. He unfurled it and read for a second before he pointed. "Yes, here you are. Jess Abels, 9. He read off my grandparents' address. Nice list. He went over to where he had dropped his sack and pulled out a pair of ice skates. Despite my fear, I felt a momentary rush of joy. I had been asking for ice skates for months. I stared as he handed them to me. "But," I tried to get the words out, "you don't look like Santa." "Not anymore. I'm still out every Christmas Eve due purely to magic. Santa still ages, but he can't die." He looked down at his cadaver. "Well, not in the traditional sense." I'm sorry," I told him. He looked up again, his eyes filling with glee. "Don't be," he reassured me. "You have freed me." My family found me curled up on the couch the next morning. Thinking at first that it was all a dream, I cheered up and I ran along with the other kids to open my presents. Along with the ice skates was a glowing blue snow globe and a note. That's when I knew that it hadn't been a dream, and why Santa had been so happy that I had seen him. Santa can't die, because Santa is not a person, but a persona. When an actor dies, their character does not die with them. They simply find someone else to play the role. The Santa that I met that night had been a little boy in 1902 who, like me, stayed up to meet Santa Claus. And like me, his breaking the rule cursed him to be the new heir. It's been a long time, but I know that the curse is still active because the snow globe that I've kept all of those years still glows. As soon as its glow fades, then I will be taken to the North Pole. No matter how tempted you are, no matter what you hear on Christmas Eve, don't leave your bed. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. Krampus, written by Sapphire Lion 15. I'm a third-generation immigrant. My grandmother came from Germany when she was 14, married my grandfather, and had my mom, who had me and my brother. Our family is a lot like any other, except around one particular time of the year. Every Christmas, my grandmother tells us, in her broken English, the story of Krampus. Krampus, according to her story, is the anti-Santa. If you were evil, she always said evil, never naughty or bad, he would come for you. And if he got you, then you would never be seen again. She never fully explained what Krampus was exactly. I looked up pictures online and I saw that Krampus movie a few years ago, but she said that the media was horribly inaccurate. Until last Christmas, I thought that Krampus was nothing more than something German parents told their kids to get them to behave. We had all planned to spend the night at my house. It would be just me, my brother, his boyfriend, my grandmother, Mom, and her new boyfriend, Derek. In theory, it would be a nice Hallmark-style Christmas. Derek made sure that it was anything but that. The first thing that he did when he came in was complain that the house was too hot and turned the thermostat way down. It was snowing outside. The next thing he did was look at the Christmas dinner that I had made and tell me that he didn't eat gluten. Then he opened the fridge and grabbed a beer. Then he made himself comfortable in my favorite chair. Saw my brother Andy and Will, his boyfriend, making out on the couch, and called them a 6-letter word that starts with F. That set the tone for the evening. Quite the charmer, eh? As if that wasn't enough, after he and Mom had gone up to their guest room, I heard him yelling, followed by Mom sobbing. Will, bless his heart, went to see what was wrong. We heard Derek call him a very unoriginal insult. When Will came back down, he said that Mom had had angry red bruises all over her, and that she had said that she was fine. My grandmother, for the first time that evening, started to speak. She stared at the fireplace, muttering in German. I couldn't tell what she was saying. My German isn't great. But I heard the words, "take evil," and Krampus. I assumed that she was telling us the Krampus story again, but had forgotten to translate it into English. This didn't surprise me. She was in her late 80s by then, and it didn't always seem like she was all there. When she finished speaking, we all went up to bed. It was exactly midnight when I heard the crash. I hadn't been able to sleep. I was worried about Mom, and I had been scrolling through Reddit. When I heard it, I threw on my robe and slippers and had gone 3 steps towards Mom's room when I realized that the crash came from the living room. Krampus, I jokingly thought, despite my unease. I went downstairs and gasped. The safety grate in front of the fireplace had been ripped aside, and soot from the chimney coated everything, branching out in all directions. Before I could even think what to do, someone came behind me and roughly grabbed my shoulder. It was Derek. "What did you do, you stupid?" He then started a tirade of insults to me, to Mom, and to women in general. When I opened my mouth to try and defend myself, he slapped me and kept talking. It was while I was rubbing my cheek that I saw it. My grandmother was right. The media can't do him justice. The horns were right, but that's about it. He was at least 7 feet tall, maybe 8. His eyes glowed red and he had sharp, predatory teeth bared into a psychotic smile. He grabbed Derek from the back of his robe. Then he shoved and pinned me against the wall. I would have screamed, but his thumb pressed into my throat, making it hurt to breathe. I shot a glance at Derek, and I saw that he had received similar treatment. Krampus stared into my eyes. I wanted to look away, but I physically couldn't. It was like he was staring into my soul, seeing every good and bad thing that I had ever done. I felt naked, exposed, victimized, but I couldn't look away. 9. That was all he said to me. His voice was nightmarish. He dropped me, letting my body slide to the floor. I started taking deep, raspy breaths. Still watching the scene in front of me, Derek was subjected to Krampus's scrutiny. From the sweat breaking out on his forehead, he didn't like it any more than I did.
"Yeah,"
Krampus said. He pulled something off of his back. A burlap sack. Derek looked into it and tried to scream. I only caught a glimpse, but we both saw inside of the sack. It was full of human bones. Krampus's grin grew wider, and Derek was thrown headfirst inside. The Christmas monster then made his way back towards the fireplace. Derek struggling from inside the sack. He reached into a tiny bag on his side and then pulled out a handful of snow-like dust, which he threw on the floor. And in the blink of an eye, the soot was gone.
"Fröhliche Weihnachten,"
he said. Then he snapped his fingers and I was out like a light. The following morning was considerably happier than the night before. No one realized that Derek was missing. His clothes, his presents, even Mom's bruises were gone. It was like he had never existed. I never mentioned what I had seen. I don't think that anyone would have believed me. Well, except for one person. My grandmother is coming for Christmas again this year, and is insisting on telling Andy and Will's new daughter the story of Krampus.